The train lurched to a stop in Sweetwater, Wyoming territory, and Clara Bennett pressed her gloved hand against the scar that ran from her left temple down to her jaw, hidden beneath the careful arrangement of her dark hair and the high collar of her traveling dress. It was June 1878, and Clara had traveled over 1,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry a rancher named William Garrett, a man she knew only through 5 carefully written letters that promised security, respectability, and a fresh start far from the whispers that had followed her for 3 years. The other passengers filed past her with their trunks and carpetbags, but Clara remained seated, gathering the courage to step into her new life. Through the dusty window, she could see the small town stretching along the main street, wooden buildings baking under the relentless summer sun, and beyond them, the vast open prairie that seemed to go on forever. When she finally descended the steps, the heat hit her like a physical thing, so different from the humid summers back east. A man approached, tall and lean in dusty work clothes, his hat pulled low against the sun. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 25 to her 23 years, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the Wyoming sky. "Miss Bennett?" he asked, and something in his voice made her hand drift unconsciously to her collar again. "Yes, I am Clara Bennett. You must be Mr. Garrett." The man removed his hat, revealing sandy hair that needed cutting. "No, ma'am, I am afraid I have difficult news. William Garrett passed 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick. I am Jackson Cole. I worked on his ranch, and I have been managing things since he died." The world seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. She had nowhere to go, no money for a return ticket, no home waiting back east. Her aunt had made it abundantly clear that Clara was no longer welcome under her roof, not after the fire, not with the scar that marked her as different, damaged. "I see," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Cole. I suppose I shall need to find accommodations at the hotel until I can arrange passage back." Jackson Cole studied her with an intensity that made her want to turn away. "The hotel is run by Mrs. Fletcher. She is kind, but rooms are dear. Miss Bennett, if you will permit me to be forward, the ranch needs help. Mr. Garrett had no family, and in his will he left the place to be sold, with the proceeds going to the church. But until that happens, there is work that needs doing. I could use someone to help with the cooking, the books, the household management. The pay would not be much, but room and board would be included, and it would give you time to decide what you want to do next." Clara looked at this stranger, who was offering her a lifeline when he had no obligation to do so. His eyes were honest, direct, and something in them made her feel that perhaps Wyoming territory might hold possibilities she had not imagined. "That is very generous, Mr. Cole." "I accept your offer with gratitude." He nodded and reached for her trunk. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I have a wagon ready. I hope you do not mind, but I should warn you that it is just the 2 of us out there. My hands are out on the range with the cattle. If you are concerned about propriety, I can find someone in town to chaperone." "I think propriety is a luxury neither of us can afford right now," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. "I trust that we are both adults capable of maintaining appropriate boundaries." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Yes, ma'am, I believe we are." The ranch house was larger than Clara expected, a solid structure of timber and stone set against a backdrop of rolling hills. Cattle grazed in the distance, and horses moved lazily in a corral near the barn. Jackson helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside, showing her to a bedroom that was clean but clearly had not been occupied recently. "Mr. Garrett's room is downstairs," Jackson explained. "I have been sleeping in the bunkhouse with the hands when they are here. You will have privacy. The kitchen is well stocked, and there is a root cellar out back. I usually eat simple fare, so anything you prepare will be an improvement over my own cooking." Clara set her bag on the bed and turned to face him. "Mr. Cole, I want to be honest with you. I am grateful for this opportunity, but I should tell you that I am not experienced in ranch work. In Philadelphia, I lived with my aunt after my parents died. I can cook and manage household accounts, but I have never lived anywhere like this." "That is more skill than I have in those areas," Jackson said. "And please call me Jackson. We are going to be working together and formality seems unnecessary out here." "Then you must call me Clara." He nodded and moved toward the door, then paused. "Clara, if you do not mind my asking, why did you agree to come all this way to marry a man you had never met?" She had known the question would come eventually. "I needed a fresh start, Jackson. Sometimes the past becomes too heavy to carry in the place where it happened. I thought perhaps distance might make it lighter." He looked at her for a long moment, and she wondered if he could see through her careful words to the truth beneath. But all he said was, "I understand that feeling. Supper is usually around 6. I will leave you to settle in." Over the following days, Clara fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, strong coffee and eggs, and whatever bread she could manage in the temperamental oven. Jackson ate quickly and headed out to work, returning at midday covered in dust and sweat for a simple meal before disappearing again until evening. She spent her days cleaning the house that had been neglected during William Garrett's illness, sorting through account books, and trying to make sense of the ranch's finances. The heat was oppressive, and Clara found herself constantly adjusting her collar and hair to ensure the scar remained hidden. She had learned long ago that people treated her differently when they saw it, their eyes filling with pity or revulsion, their questions invasive and endless. The scar was a reminder of the worst night of her life, and she had no desire to relive it through the curiosity of strangers. On the fourth evening, as she was serving supper, Jackson finally broke the careful silence they had maintained. "You do not have to hide, not here." Clara's hand flew to her collar, her heart racing. "I do not know what you mean. Your neck, your face, you are always touching them, making sure everything is covered." "Clara, I have seen you wince when the heat gets bad, and I know those high collars must be uncomfortable. Whatever you are hiding, it does not matter to me." "It matters to everyone," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "You do not understand." Jackson set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "Maybe not. But I know something about carrying marks that tell stories you would rather forget. Look." He rolled up his right sleeve, revealing a network of scars that ran from his wrist to his elbow, some thin and white, others puckered and red. "Barbed wire accident when I was 19. Got tangled up trying to free a calf, and by the time help arrived, I had torn myself to pieces trying to get loose. The doctor said I was lucky not to lose the arm." Clara stared at the scars, at the evidence of pain and survival etched into his skin. "That must have been terrible." "It was, but it taught me something. Every mark tells a brave story, Clara. Whether it is from saving a calf or surviving whatever brought you here, those scars are proof that you fought and won. There is no shame in that." Tears burned in Clara's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such simple acceptance. "It is not the same. Your scars are from an accident, something that happened to you. Mine are from my own stupidity." "Tell me," Jackson said quietly, "please." And somehow, in the fading light of that Wyoming evening, Clara found herself telling him the truth she had hidden for 3 years. She told him about the tenement fire in Philadelphia, about the family trapped on the 3rd floor, about how she had run into the burning building because she could hear the children screaming. She told him about pulling 2 children to safety before the beam fell, about the searing pain and the smell of her own flesh burning, about the weeks in the hospital and the scar that remained, running from her temple down her jaw and neck, a twisted reminder of that night. My aunt said I was foolish, that I had ruined myself for any decent marriage, that no man would want a woman marked like that. The community saw me as reckless, someone who had brought shame on the family by drawing attention to herself. The children's parents thanked me once, but after that, everyone just wanted to forget it happened. I became the woman with the scar, and nothing else I did mattered. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. You saved 2 children from burning to death, and your aunt called you foolish. Clara, that is the bravest thing I have ever heard. Those marks on your face are not shame. They are a badge of courage that most people will never earn. But they are ugly, she whispered. They frighten people. They are part of you, Jackson said firmly, and nothing about you could be ugly to me. The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and powerful. Clara looked up and found Jackson watching her with an expression she could not quite name, something tender and fierce all at once. May I see? He asked. Not because I am curious like those people back east, but because I want to know all of you, not just the parts you think are acceptable to show. Slowly, with trembling fingers, Clara reached up and removed the pins from her hair. The dark waves fell around her shoulders, and she unbuttoned the high collar of her dress. The scar was revealed, angry and raised, running in a jagged line from her left temple down across her cheek and jaw, disappearing beneath the fabric at her shoulder. She had not shown it to anyone willingly since the doctor removed the bandages. Jackson stood and walked around the table, stopping in front of her chair. He reached out, hesitated, then gently traced the line of the scar with his fingertips. His touch was feather-light, reverent, and Clara found herself leaning into it despite years of hiding. Every mark tells a brave story, he said again, and yours is beautiful. Jackson, she breathed, and then his arms were around her, and she was crying into his chest, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. He held her through it, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft words she could not quite hear, but that soothed her nonetheless. When the storm finally passed, Clara pulled back, embarrassed by her loss of control. I am sorry, I did not mean to fall apart like that. Do not apologize. I am honored that you trusted me with this. He guided her back to her chair and sat across from her again. Clara, I want to tell you something. I did not plan to feel this way. When I met you at the train station, I was trying to do the right thing, to help someone who had traveled all this way only to find disappointment. But these past few days, watching you bring life back to this house, seeing your strength and grace, I have found myself thinking thoughts I have no right to think. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. What kind of thoughts? Thoughts about asking you to stay, not as a housekeeper or an employee, but as something more. I know it is too soon, and I know you came here expecting to marry a different man, but Clara, I am falling in love with you. I do not care about your scar. I care about the woman who earned it, the woman who runs toward danger to save others, the woman who traveled across the country for a fresh start and had the courage to begin again when that start fell through. I thought I was broken, Clara whispered. I thought no one could see past the marks on my face to the person underneath. You are not broken. You are extraordinary. And if you will give me a chance, I will spend every day showing you that. Clara reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the ridges of his own scars beneath her palm. I think I am falling in love with you too, Jackson Cole. It terrifies me how quickly it has happened, but I cannot deny what I feel. He squeezed her hand gently. Then let us be terrified together. The summer days stretched long and golden, and Clara found herself happier than she had been in years. She and Jackson settled into an easy partnership, working side by side to keep the ranch running while they waited for the church to finalize the sale. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. Jackson told her about growing up on a small farm in Kansas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 17, about drifting west looking for work and purpose. Clara told him about her childhood before the fire, about her love of reading and her dream of one day having a real home of her own. They were careful to maintain propriety, but the attraction between them was undeniable. Sometimes Clara would catch Jackson watching her as she worked, his eyes warm with affection. Sometimes their hands would brush as they passed each other, and the simple contact would send electricity through her entire body. She stopped hiding her scar around the ranch, wearing her hair loose and her collars open, reveling in the freedom of being fully seen and fully accepted. One afternoon in late July, as Clara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, a rider approached. She recognized him as Reverend Matthews from the church in town, a stern man with iron-gray hair and a perpetually disapproving expression. Jackson came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. "Reverend Matthews, what brings you out here?" The Reverend dismounted and pulled an envelope from his saddlebag. "I have news about the ranch, Mr. Cole. We have found a buyer, a cattle baron from Colorado who wants to expand his operations. He is offering a fair price, and the church board has voted to accept. You will need to vacate the property by the end of August." Jackson's face remained carefully neutral, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." The Reverend's gaze shifted to Clara, and she saw his eyes narrow as he took in her appearance, the scar clearly visible in the bright sunlight. "Miss Bennett, I trust you have been making arrangements for your own situation. The church cannot provide assistance for those who make questionable choices." "My choices are none of your concern," Clara said coolly. "I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." "I am sure you are," the Reverend said, his tone suggesting the opposite. "Nevertheless, a young woman living alone with a man to whom she is not married is a situation that invites gossip and scandal. For the sake of your reputation, I hope you will make proper arrangements soon." After the Reverend left, Jackson kicked at the dirt in frustration. "I should have known this was coming. The church wanted to sell as quickly as possible. I just hoped we would have more time." "Time for what?" Clara asked. "Time to figure out what comes next. Time to build something together before we have to face the world's judgment about what we are to each other." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "Clara, I have some money saved, enough to maybe buy a small piece of land or start over somewhere else. But it would be a hard life, harder than what you have here. I do not know if I have the right to ask you to share that with me." Clara stepped closer, taking both his hands in hers. "Jackson Cole, are you asking me to marry you?" He looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. "I am asking if you would consider binding your life to mine, knowing that I cannot offer you much beyond my love and my promise to cherish you every day. I know we have only known each other for 6 weeks, but I am more certain of my feelings for you than I have been about anything in my life." "Yes," Clara said simply. "Yes, I will marry you. I did not come to Wyoming for an easy life. I came for a fresh start, and that is exactly what you are offering me. A chance to build something new, something ours, in a place where the past does not define us." Jackson pulled her into his arms, and this time when he kissed her, it was not tentative or questioning but full of promise and passion. Clara melted into him, feeling whole and wanted in a way she had never experienced before. They were married the following week in a simple ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Fletcher from the hotel and her husband as witnesses. Clara wore a simple blue dress, her hair down and her scar visible, and she saw only love and pride in Jackson's eyes as they exchanged their vows. The Reverend performed the ceremony with barely concealed disapproval, but Clara found she did not care. She was beginning a new chapter, and the opinions of small-minded people held no power over her anymore. With the money from Jackson's savings and a small inheritance Clara had received from her parents, they purchased 40 acres of land north of Sweetwater, rough country that no one else wanted, but that held potential for someone willing to work. They spent the remaining weeks of August building a small cabin, working from dawn until dark to create a home before the Wyoming winter set in. Jackson proved to be a skilled carpenter, and Clara discovered she had a talent for making even rough surroundings comfortable and welcoming. The ranch hands from Garrett's place helped when they could, and slowly a community began to form around them. Other ranchers and homesteaders would stop by with advice or offers of assistance, and Clara realized that here on the frontier, what mattered was not the marks on a person's face, but the strength of their character and the willingness to help a neighbor. By September, the cabin was finished, and they moved in with little more than the clothes on their backs and the furniture they had built themselves. It was cramped and drafty, with a leaky roof and windows that did not quite fit their frames, but to Clara, it was paradise. For the first time in her life, she had a home that was truly hers, built with her own hands alongside the man she loved. The winter of 1878 was brutal, with blizzards that lasted for days and temperatures that dropped so low the water in the bucket froze solid overnight. Jackson and Clara huddled together for warmth, telling stories and making plans for the spring. They lost 3 of their small herd of cattle to the cold, but they survived, and that felt like victory enough. When spring finally arrived, they planted a garden and expanded the cabin, adding a second room and a proper kitchen. Jackson found work breaking horses for other ranchers, earning enough money to slowly build their herd. Clara took in sewing and kept the books for several neighboring homesteads, contributing her share to their modest income. In June of 1879, exactly 1 year after Clara had arrived in Sweetwater, she discovered she was pregnant. She told Jackson over supper, watching nervously for his reaction. His face lit up with joy so pure and unguarded that she felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Clara, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though she could see the answer in his expression. Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, amazed, grateful, all of those things at once. He came around the table and knelt beside her chair, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. This child will know they are loved from the very first moment. And they will grow up understanding that scars and marks and differences are nothing to be ashamed of, that they are just part of the beautiful, complicated story of being human. Clara ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "You are going to be an amazing father." Their son was born in February of 1880, during a break in the winter storms. They named him Thomas, after Jackson's father, and he had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Jackson proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried, singing lullabies in a surprisingly pleasant voice, and marveling at every tiny sound and movement. Clara watched her husband with their child, and felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. The scar that had once defined her now seemed like simply another part of her body, no more significant than her brown eyes or the freckles on her nose. Thomas would grow up seeing it every day, and to him, it would just be part of his mother's face, nothing frightening or shameful. As Thomas grew, Jackson expanded their operation, buying more land and building a proper barn. They hired 2 ranch hands, young men looking for work and a place to belong, and the small homestead began to feel like a real ranch. Clara managed the household and the finances, proving to have a shrewd head for business that helped them turn a modest profit even in difficult years. In the spring of 1882, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her father's sandy hair and her mother's determination. Thomas, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help with her care. The cabin was full of noise and life, and Jackson often said he could not imagine how he had survived the quiet loneliness of his years before Clara arrived. They faced challenges, of course. Droughts and harsh winters, cattle rustlers and wild animals, illness and injury. But they faced them together, and that made all the difference. Clara's scar was occasionally noticed by strangers passing through, but she no longer tried to hide it. When people asked, she told them the truth with her head held high, and if they responded with pity or judgment, she simply moved on. Jackson's words had proven true over and over again. Every mark told a brave story, and she was proud of hers. In the fall of 1885, 7 years after Clara had stepped off the train in Sweetwater expecting to marry a man she had never met, she stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house and watched the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. Thomas, now 5, was helping his father feed the horses, while 3-year-old Sarah played with a rag doll at Clara's feet. Jackson caught her eye from across the yard and smiled, that same warm, genuine smile that had first made her believe she might be worthy of love. She smiled back, touching her scar in a gesture that had transformed from anxious concealment to simple acknowledgement. This mark, and all the others life would inevitably bring, were part of her story. They told of courage and survival, of second chances and new beginnings, of a love that had blossomed in the unlikeliest of circumstances and grown stronger with each passing day. "Mama, look." Sarah called, holding up her doll. "I made her a dress." Clara bent down to admire her daughter's handiwork, the crooked stitches and mismatched fabric, and felt a wave of love so intense it almost hurt. This was her life now, full and rich and complicated and beautiful. She had traveled across the country looking for a fresh start and found instead a home, a partner, a family, and a sense of belonging she had never known existed. That evening, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Clara and Jackson sat together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest. The stars were brilliant in the clear night sky, countless points of light stretching from horizon to horizon. "Do you ever regret it?" Jackson asked quietly. "Coming here, marrying me, choosing this hard life?" Clara lifted her head to look at him. "Never. Not for a single moment. You gave me something I had never had before, Jackson. You saw all of me, the scars and the strength, the fear and the courage, and you loved me not despite those things but because of them. You taught me that I did not need to hide to be worthy of love." "You taught me the same thing," he said, squeezing her gently. "Every mark tells a brave story, and Clara, your story is the most beautiful one I know." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, tasting the promise of all the years ahead. They would grow old together on this land they had built with their own hands, watching their children grow and eventually having grandchildren to spoil. There would be more hardships and more joys, more scars earned and more stories told. But through it all, they would have each other, and that was more than enough. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. Clara breathed it in, this Wyoming air that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called and another answered. The land was wild and unforgiving, but it was theirs, and they had proven themselves equal to its challenges. "Tell me again," Clara said, tracing the scars on Jackson's arm with her fingertips. "Tell me what you said that first night." Jackson smiled and covered her hand with his, their scarred skin pressed together, a map of survival and strength. "Every mark tells a brave story. And yours, my love, is the bravest and most beautiful story I have ever known." Clara settled back against him, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, and knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The scar she had once hidden in shame had become a symbol of her courage, a reminder that she had faced the fire and emerged transformed. It had brought her to this place, to this man, to this life she had built from nothing but hope and determination. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own mix of challenges and blessings. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the horses and had his father's patient way with animals. Sarah was bold and fearless, always the first to try something new and never afraid to speak her mind. In 1887, Clara gave birth to another son, Daniel, who had a sunny disposition and could charm a smile out of anyone. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Jackson's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and ranchers came from as far as Montana to buy his stock. Clara's bookkeeping skills became known throughout the territory, and she managed the accounts for a dozen homesteads and small businesses. They were never wealthy, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. One summer day in 1890, a woman arrived at the ranch in a hired wagon from town. She was young, perhaps 20, with a bandage covering most of the right side of her face. She introduced herself as Mary Atkinson and said she had heard about Clara from Mrs. Fletcher at the hotel. "She said you might understand," Mary said, her voice trembling. "She said you would not judge me." Clara invited her inside and made tea, waiting patiently while the young woman gathered her courage. Finally, Mary removed the bandage, revealing burned scars similar to Clara's own, though more recent and still red and angry. "My house caught fire 3 months ago," Mary whispered. "I got out, but my face was burned. My fiancé broke off our engagement. He said he could not marry a woman who looked like this. I do not know what to do. I cannot go home. Everyone stares at me like I am a monster." Clara reached out and gently took Mary's hand. "You are not a monster. You are a survivor. And I promise you, this does not have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning." She told Mary her own story, about the fire in Philadelphia and the journey to Wyoming, about hiding her scar and learning to wear it with pride. She introduced her to Jackson, who treated Mary with the same kind acceptance he had shown Clara all those years ago. And when Mary asked if there might be work for her at the ranch, Clara did not hesitate. "We can always use help, especially during the busy season. You can stay in the spare room and work alongside me until you figure out what you want to do next." Mary stayed for 6 months, and in that time, Clara watched her transform from a frightened, broken girl into a confident woman. She learned to ride and rope, to cook and keep house, and slowly the shame faded from her eyes. When she finally left to take a teaching position in a town to the north, she hugged Clara tightly and whispered, "Thank you for showing me that scars can tell brave stories." The incident reminded Clara of how far she had come, how the terrified young woman who had stepped off the train in 1878 had grown into someone who could offer strength and hope to others. She and Jackson talked about it that night, lying in bed with the windows open to catch the cool evening breeze. "You did a good thing, helping that girl," Jackson said. "You gave her what I tried to give you all those years ago, the knowledge that she is more than her scars." "We gave her that together," Clara corrected. "Just like we have built everything else together. Jackson, do you remember what you said to me that day at the train station about the ranch needing help?" "I remember. I was so nervous, trying to figure out how to help you without making you feel like charity. I thought you were just being kind. I did not realize you were offering me a future." She rolled over to face him, studying the face she knew as well as her own. There were lines around his eyes now and silver threading through his hair, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. "I love you, Jackson Cole. I love the life we have built, the family we have created, the home we have made. Every day with you is a gift." "I love you too," he said, pulling her close. more than I could ever find the words to say. You took a chance on a dusty cowboy offering you work on a failing ranch, and you turned it into something more beautiful than I ever dreamed possible." They held each other in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling for the night, and Clara felt a profound sense of peace. The scar was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined her. She was a wife, a mother, a rancher, a friend. She was strong and capable and loved, not despite her marks, but simply as herself, whole and complete. The children grew as children do. Thomas took over more of the ranch work as he moved through his teenage years, showing a natural talent for managing cattle and horses. Sarah developed a passion for books and learning, and Clara taught her everything she knew, watching with pride as her daughter's sharp mind tackled problems with creativity and determination. Daniel was the peacemaker, always finding ways to smooth over conflicts and bring people together. In 1895, Thomas fell in love with a neighbor girl named Emily, and they were married in a ceremony at the ranch, with half the territory in attendance. Clara watched her son exchange vows and saw Jackson in his face, the same steady strength and quiet kindness. When Emily became pregnant the following year, Clara realized she was going to be a grandmother, and the thought filled her with wonder. The years moved faster now, seasons blending together in a rhythm of work and family, loss and joy. Jackson's hair turned fully silver, and Clara found her own dark locks threaded with white. They moved a little slower, worked a little less, but their love remained constant and strong. They had faced drought and blizzards, financial hardship, and the inevitable sorrows that life brings. They had buried friends and welcomed new neighbors, celebrated births and mourned deaths. Through it all, the scar remained, a constant reminder of where Clara had come from and how far she had traveled. Young mothers sometimes asked about it, and Clara would tell the story of the fire and the children she had saved, of the journey west and the cowboy who had taught her that every mark tells a brave story. She saw recognition in their eyes sometimes, the understanding that they too carried marks, visible or invisible, that told of their own strength and survival. On a warm June evening in 1898, exactly 20 years after Clara had arrived in Sweetwater, the family gathered at the ranch house for a celebration. Thomas and Emily were there with their 2 children, Clara and Jackson's grandchildren, who filled the house with laughter and noise. Sarah had returned from her teaching position in Cheyenne, bringing with her a young lawyer named Robert, who could not seem to take his eyes off her. Daniel, now 11, was showing his nephews how to rope a fence post. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching her family and felt Jackson's arms slip around her waist from behind. He rested his chin on her shoulder, and they stood together in comfortable silence, observing the life they had created. 20 years, Jackson murmured. Do you remember that first night at the ranch, how terrified we both were? I remember everything, Clara said. Every moment, every conversation, every touch. You saved my life, Jackson, in ways you will never fully understand. We saved each other, he corrected gently. I was just drifting before you came, existing but not really living. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You gave me everything that matters. Clara turned in his arms and looked up at him. This man who had seen past her scars to the woman beneath, who had loved her completely and without reservation for 2 decades. His face was weathered and lined, marked by years of hard work and Wyoming sun, but his eyes still held that same warmth and acceptance that had first made her brave enough to remove her collar and show him her truth. I love you, she said. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, he replied. Every scar, every story, every brave and beautiful part of you. They kissed, soft and sweet, tasting of decades of partnership and devotion. Through the window, they could hear Thomas teaching his son to rope, Sarah laughing at something Robert said, Daniel calling everyone to the table for supper. It was an ordinary evening, full of the simple chaos of family life, and it was perfect. The meal was loud and joyful, with multiple conversations happening at once and children squirming in their seats. Clara looked around the table at the faces she loved most in the world and felt her heart swell with gratitude. She had come to Wyoming a frightened young woman, hiding her scars and her shame, believing herself unworthy of love. She had found instead a partner who cherished her, a family who adored her, and a home that had been built on a foundation of acceptance and courage. After supper, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, Jackson took Clara's hand and led her out to the porch. They sat in their customary spot, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest, watching the day fade into night. "Every mark tells a brave story," Jackson said, as he had said countless times over the years. "And Clara, your story is still being written. Every day, every choice, every moment of love and courage adds another chapter." "Our story," Clara corrected. "This is our story, Jackson. Written together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of love at a time." The stars emerged, bright and eternal, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang to the moon. The wind carried the scent of sage and summer grass, and from inside the house came the sound of Sarah playing the piano, a melody both sweet and melancholy. Clara breathed it all in, committing this moment to memory, knowing that these were the times she would treasure most when she was old and her own story was nearing its end. But that was still far in the future. For now, she was here, with Jackson beside her and her family safe and happy around her. For now, she was home in every sense of the word. The scar that had once been her greatest shame had become her greatest pride, a visible testament to her courage and strength. It had brought her across the country to a dusty train station in Wyoming territory, where a kind cowboy with scars of his own had taught her the most important lesson of her life, that every mark tells a brave story, and hers was one worth telling. Years later, when Clara was old and her grandchildren asked about the scar on her face, she would tell them the truth. She would tell them about the fire and the children, about the journey west and the cowboy who had seen her completely and loved her anyway. She would tell them that scars were nothing to be ashamed of, that they were proof of survival and strength, badges of honor earned through courage and sacrifice. And then she would tell them the rest of the story, about building a life from nothing, about love that deepened with time, about a family created through choice and devotion. She would tell them that the best stories were not the ones that ended with perfection, but the ones that acknowledged struggle and pain and came out stronger on the other side. But for now, on this perfect June evening in 1898, Clara simply sat with her husband and watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. She traced the scars on his arm with her fingertips, feeling the familiar ridges and valleys that mirrored her own marks. They were both scarred, both survivors, both brave in their own ways. And together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. "Every mark tells a brave story," Clara whispered, more to herself than to Jackson. He squeezed her gently and pressed a kiss to her temple, right where her scar began. "And yours, my love, is the bravest story I know." In the house behind them, laughter rang out and Clara smiled, knowing that her story had indeed been brave, but that the greatest courage had been in choosing to trust, to love, to build a life with someone who saw all of her and chose to stay. The scar would fade with time, as all scars do, but the love would remain, constant and true, a testament to the power of acceptance and the beauty of seeing another person completely, marks and all, and choosing to love them anyway. That was the story Clara wanted her grandchildren to know. Not just the story of a fire and a rescue, but the story of a woman who had been broken and became whole, who had been hiding and learned to stand in the light, who had been alone and found a family. It was a story written in scars and choices, in courage and love, in the wild, beautiful landscape of Wyoming territory, and in the even wilder territory of the human heart. And it was a story that would continue, passed down through generations, a reminder that every mark tells a brave story, and that the bravest thing any of us can do is allow ourselves to be fully seen, scars and all, and trust that we will be loved not despite our imperfections, but because they are part of what makes us beautifully, courageously human.